Hi, everyone. I'm Helena. Thank you for joining us. And the smaller group dynamic is really fun and even more personal, so that's good. So, briefly, there was a lot of sequelae from the epidemic, and one of them was a pretty massive resignation of employees from various companies. And companies sought to understand why this was happening, and it didn't take much of a deep dive to realize that it was actually related to toxic work cultures. And as such, they were like, well, let's actually delineate what exactly the finer, what can we target in this generic term of toxic culture. So as a result, there were like millions of Glassdoor surveys put out, 1.3 million respondents, and the respondees came back with these top 5 attributes that I was referencing in the intro. Basically, cutthroat, unethical, abusive, non-inclusive, and disrespectful. These are the top 5 contributors to a toxic work culture. And interestingly, employees would rather deal with a significant compensation cut 10 times more than they would deal with having a toxic work culture that involves these attributes. I also thought it was of interest that the most represented one among all those respondees was actually disrespectful. Employees did not want to be disrespected, and that was particularly meaningful to them and particularly impacted decisions to leave companies, which had massive financial implications.
So I think your presence here probably indicates your understanding of the significant costs associated with this. I don't want to dwell on these too much other than to say that in the end, the most distal consequence of toxicity directly impacts patient care and outcomes in the form of costs and your risk of malpractice and burnout among you and your colleagues. So I think we're aware that the costs are very real and very impactful. Kurt is going to sort of set the context for this discussion.
So we were given this topic by the Wellness Committee. There is very little data about how to address this. As we break them down into individual 5s, we can do the individual, but we can do a little bit of that. So here's 3 principles we're going to invite you to use this morning in the next 10 minutes as we give you a scenario and ask you to work with it. And so the first one is, what's your North Star? When you are struggling in a toxic situation, whether it's the person or a situation, a department, what do you really want? What's important to you long term? Do you want to get even? Do you want to be violent? Do you want to be silent? What do you really want? The second one is, and this is a little complicated, so we made it into a graphic. This is ubiquitous. It's everywhere on the internet. The circle of concern are things that you think about and have zero control over. Okay? Here's a terrible example. I am offended by poaching ivory in Africa. I live in Atlanta. I could go picket in front of the state capitol. It would make no difference at all. Okay? Circle of concern. Circle of influence. I was a trauma director. I was a quality officer. I was an officer in our national organization. There were things that I could influence because I showed up, I worked, I contributed, and I brought my best self to a group of people. Circle of control. I get up this morning, I could exercise, I could eat right, I go to sleep, I could be kind to my kids, I could be kind to my wife. Those are within my control, okay? So the reason this is important is in your institution, the more time you spend in your circle of influence, the larger it grows. People trust you, you show up, you contribute, you follow through, you return a report, you're producing things that's making the institution better. They love having you there. If I don't do those things and I go picket in front of the state capitol about ivory poaching, okay, then my circle of influence decreases. I know that's an absurd, but you can find your own area of concern that you can't influence. And the reason that's important in these scenarios we're giving you is disciplining yourself to figure out what you can do and what you can't do in this situation. So the last one is what's your story? So when you have an adversarial interaction with someone, there is some data that you're probably fighting over, okay? You feel one thing, you don't know what they're doing, you just know their response to you, okay? So if you can meet with the individual or represent the institution and create some common understanding, this is what you see, this is what I see, and then you can begin to test scenarios or actions that will help be influential and solve the problem. So for the next 10 minutes, we would like to have you in groups of 3. So Sabina, you get to sit here with the boys, okay? And your name is? Carrie, you get to, that's right, we need more boys here. You get to sit over here, okay? And I think this group will have 4. Okay, come sit over there, okay? And so we would like to assign you, I think we should use both clinical scenarios, okay? So let's just agree that we're all going to use, we're going to use number 2, because last time we focused on number 3, okay? Use number 2, and please, when you come back, answer these 3 questions. What did you notice or learn? Were there things that you felt as you went through this? And then what can you do with these principles tomorrow when you go back and you walk into the operating room and your partner is screaming at a resident during a difficult case, okay? When you report back, by the way, Rado, you be the reporter, and I need a volunteer over here. Thank you for smiling at me. You're my reporter, okay? And so don't rehearse the scenario. Just tell us what you learned, okay? Yeah, I'm going to put these. Thank you for asking. So it's what's your North Star? What are you influential over? And what's your story? Okay, ready, set, go. Okay, you guys, it's time to return report. Since I'm sitting over here and have the mic, I'm giving this to Rado.
So we discussed our North Star in this situation is the patient safety. So I want to make sure that the patient is okay when we walk in and figure out if they need help from a purely medical standpoint. And then we discussed as well that maybe the resident feels somewhat unsafe, but could maybe benefit from a break. And we could pitch in and assist or help in that complicated situation. Do I go through the 3 points?
Anything else you want to say? Rado, this is unbelievably efficient. You just gave us 3 more minutes, so is there something else you want to say? What sort of language would you use? Repeat the question. Repeat last question.
So what type of language we would use? I would say I would come in and say, hey, is everything okay? How are you doing? How can I help you, or is help needed? And then listen and probably wait a little bit and watch. And then potentially I would suggest a break for the resident. How you have been there for a long time, do you want to take a quick break? And I can scrub in to help you out on the pragmatic side without. And then once, if the resident is out, ask my colleague how he or she feels and if everything is okay and how I can support that person. I do. I would also feel the temperature a little bit. I think we need to protect the patient, number 1, and then the learner as well. And then ask probably anesthesia and the nursing staff how they're feeling as well. Because they've been witnesses and bystanders and may be scared to speak up as well. So I think I would just say I would probably watch and listen for a while before I intervene, but just feel if once the stressful situation is over, if everybody has been trying to like compensate for what was going on.
Good job, you guys. All right, Tara, you're up.
So very similarly, our North Star was 3 things. I care about the child, I care about my partner, I care about the resident. I care about the child, the baby on the table. I care about my partner, who's obviously struggling, and I care about the resident, who's also struggling too. I think you bring up a good point about the rest of the people in the room, because they are affected. They're kind of innocent bystanders. So that is another layer of the North Star, but I think those 3 things are really in the immediate moment. Those are the things that have to direct the next actions. The circle of influence that we talked about was taking the temperature of the room. How can I help? Asking, like, what do you need me to do? If it's running to the blood bank, I'll run to the blood bank. If it's, talking to the PICU, I'll talk to the PICU. If it's scrubbing in, I'll scrub in. I like the idea of having the resident take a break, just, step back, take some deep breaths. You go to the bathroom, settle down a little, refocus, come back. I like that idea. Acknowledging that, wow, this is a really tough case. You guys have been working really hard for a really long time together, and you've made progress. You've moved forward. And then I think, once the child's safety is ensured, having some debriefing with both the partner and the resident, and maybe the other people in the room. And then we talked about apologies and making amends, and how that is actually important and can really strengthen, like, a relationship that fractures a little bit and then you mend it is a really strong relationship, because you've been through discomfort together, kind of like boot camp. Like, people come out of boot camp with lifelong ties, right? And so when you have a difficult encounter and you come out on the other side of it, you make a really strong relationship. And then I wasn't exactly sure how we were supposed to answer what's our story without actually telling each of our stories, which I don't know that we have time for. What was the purpose of that third one? Okay. Okay.
Say a little more about the discussion about the apology.
So I guess we talked. Repeat what? Oh, he asked me to discuss a little bit more about apologies, and I actually have a lot of experience with amends, apologies, being very brief about what you're apologizing for is important. Not explaining your behavior, not saying, "But you did this." Just, "I am sorry for what I did." And then, in particular, not expecting any sort of response, like, "Oh, I forgive you," or, just allowing the other person to do whatever they need to do for their side. Like, if you've apologized, your side of the street is clean, you're done, your work is done. And you can definitely break an apology by trying to explain your behavior or mitigate your behavior or talk about what crappy things they did, because that's not important, in terms of apology. And then what's really important about apology is not doing it again, like the continuing behavior change that you have to do is like a living amends, like continuing to make amends as you continue to interact.
So one of the themes we've heard here and from the other groups is the importance of acknowledging or affirming. I think someone said, gosh, it looks like this is a tough case, can really help to lower the temperature for everyone in the room. I wonder, on the back we have some references, one of which is Crucial Conversations. I was just curious how many of you have read that book. I'm sure Tom has, yeah. It is, I can't recommend it highly enough. Anytime one has a conversation with someone else where the stakes are high and the emotions run high, in the book they explain that your response is hardwired physiology. It's either fight or flight. And having some anticipation of what you could say in those moments is really a skill that can be developed. And so I highly recommend that.
I wanted to add, I learned about this app called Vital Talk, which goes through these sorts of difficult conversations. Like, you can refresh yourself before you have the conversation. I recently used it when I had to deliver some kind of serious news over the phone, and it's just like, you know, get ready, understand, inform, deepen, equip. So it just gives you like these checkpoints of like, here's what you need to do during this difficult conversation, about acknowledging, responding to emotions, acknowledging your own emotions, planning, interpersonal relationships, establishing rapport, all those sorts of things. Like, it just gives you some kind of tips for having these difficult conversations on a platform that's easy for people like me to access easily.
Very good. Okay, you guys, obviously you noticed that there weren't simple, easy answers for these questions. Okay, so you remember, you may not remember this. This is a historical event that occurred. This was what Steve Jobs would always do at the end of his annual meeting. This is where he pulls out of his pocket the iPad, the iPhone. He always saved it for the end. That's when, so unfortunately, this is not an iPhone that we're giving you. There will be a time, come in you guys, come on in. There will be a time when you may be faced with an insoluble problem where the situation is unethical, unsafe to you as a person, unsafe to your family. You're not safe, okay? There are several suggestions about when it's time to go. You'll all decide that yourself. I had in my workplace for 30 years a toxic environment. You can ask some of my partners. We all chose to stay and work around it and address it as best we could. So none of us, actually that's not, two of us left during that time. So we want to thank you for coming. Please go into the WOVA app, click onto the third session, and it says more notes. You click on that area. It says select the session, and you do that, and then it gives you the opportunity to give us feedback. This is, again, a journey. We all learned how to do this. Bob and Helen and I spent hours putting this together because there isn't an easy answer to this. So we want to know what you learned and what you would do differently so that we can come back next year with a better offering, okay? Vielen Dank. Thank you for coming.